everyone, welcome to another interesting TGIF episode of the Anti-Pharmacist podcast. Hope you've had a nice week so far. And to my Muslim listeners, I say happy Eid al-Fitr in advance to you. Thank God that the fasting period is finally over. I hope that you listen to my episode on dosing during fasting for those that have to take medications during their fasting. And for those that didn't, you can still go back and listen to it because it will be useful even for other fasting activities, even next year, right? Yes. And the week has actually been very busy and eventful for me. But all in all, I am here again in your ears to bring you this interesting episode. Because why? The show must go on and I love you guys like that. But there's an interesting thing I have to tell you today. I'm introducing a new series to the Anti-Pharmacist podcast, which is called the Drug Discovery Series. Yeah, you know the podcast is about medications, their usage, and even your health in general. And being a pharmacist and pharmacologist myself, I found it necessary to take you guys behind the scenes of how these drugs came to be. They didn't just appear out of nowhere or out of magic. A lot of works are put into research, into the discovery of these medications. And I thought it necessary to bring it to you guys so that you would know why these drugs are important. Maybe that would even change your perspectives about these medications, okay? So I'll be taking you guys along with me on this drug discovery series as we discover the scientists behind the drugs we use today, the history of how they came about them. Some came about them deliberately, and you would be surprised to know that a lot of them just came about by accident or incident or what I call serendipity. That, in my opinion, will bring a particular kind of appreciation to science in general and these medications. So, the aim of this series particularly is to let listeners into what goes on behind the scenes of these medications that we use now. There's a lot of history embedded into the common medications we take for different ailments, okay? And even how their names came about. We will learn about the scientists behind them, the situation surrounding these discoveries, because they are worth talking about. And so I have decided to dedicate some episodes of this podcast to doing just that. Also, I'll be using the drug discovery series to bring you guys news about newly discovered drugs and drugs of interest. That is also something to watch out for, right? Yeah. So today I'll be talking about a particular medication that a lot of people may not have heard about before, but it is very important to the discovery of antimicrobial drugs generally. And the name of that drug is Salvarsan, also known as compound 606, okay? And Salvarsan is an antisyphilitic medication, meaning that it is used to treat the infection by the bacteria Treponema pallidum called syphilis. Syphilis is a sexually transmitted infection which ravaged the world in the early 19th century, okay? And this drug was discovered in the lab of a scientist called Paul Ehrlich. For those that are familiar with science history, Paul Ehrlich is quite a big deal in the history of science. Paul Ehrlich was a German medical scientist. He was actually an immunologist, a physician, a pharmacologist, okay? And he won the Nobel Prize for Physiology or Medicine in 1908. He is credited for the discovery of Salvarsan, but actually the drug was discovered in his lab, not particularly by him, but as a build-up to the works he has done previously in actually isolating some compounds, particularly organic arsenic compounds, to be able to discover their pharmacological actions or what they could be used for. So a scientist in this lab called Sir Achiro Atta was the one that discovered the antisyphilitic activity of Salvarsan in the year 1909. Okay, the lead scientist at that time was Alfred Betham, and Salvarsan is known by the scientific name asphenamine. Apart from syphilis, the drug also is used to treat relapsing fever and African trypanosomiasis, also known as sleeping sickness. It was the first modern antimicrobial agent discovered. So you see that it is quite a big deal. So what happened during the discovery of Salvarsan? Let me take you right into the story. It all started in the year 1891 when Paul Ehrlich, alongside his associates, launched his first set of experiments to explore the therapeutic properties of various dyes in Frankfurt, Germany. His first foray into this area was with methylene blue, a dye that he found to be bound strongly to the malaria parasite. While Ehrlich successfully used the dye to cure 2 patients with malaria, he soon abandoned the work on the dye because it proved inferior to quinine, which was a drug that was then in widespread use for malaria. Thereafter, Ehrlich and his Japanese colleague Kiyoshi Shiga evaluated hundreds of synthetic compounds against infections caused by protozoa parasites. By 1904, the two of them had discovered a dye known as tryptan red, which was found to be effective in mice infected with Trypanosoma equinum, a protozoa belonging to the Trypanosoma species. But it soon became clear that some trypanosomes could develop resistance to this dye. Following the work on tryptan red, Ehrlich began exploring the use of another compound, etoxyl, which was an arsenic compound that was used as a treatment for trypanosomiasis, which is sleeping sickness, from the year 1905. The key issue for Ehrlich was to find a way of improving this arsenic compound because it was only effective if used in high doses over a prolonged period. And at such doses, however, there's a high risk of causing damage to the optic nerve, which could cause blindness. So, Ehrlich set out to eliminate the problem by trying to modify the chemical structure of etoxyl. This he did with the help of another scientist, Alfred Bethlehem. Together, they synthesized more than 100 variations of this arsenic compound, and one of these was asphenamine, also known as Salvarsan. The drug was initially named Compound 606 because it was the 6th in the 6th group of compounds produced. The first person to suggest that this asphenamine might have potential as a treatment for syphilis was Erich Hoffmann. Back in 1905, he and Fritz Schaldin, another scientist, discovered that the disease syphilis was caused by Treponema pallidum, a spiral-shaped bacteria. Based on this observation of similarity between these spirochetes, that is the Treponema, and trypanosomes that causes trypanosomiasis, Hoffmann encouraged Paul Ehrlich to investigate asphenamine for syphilis, a disease for which there was a crying need for improved treatments back then. Tests carried out by 2 of Ehrlich's assistants initially suggested the new arsenic compound was useless against Treponema pallidum. The drug's prospects, however, changed following Ehrlich's recruitment of the Japanese bacteriologist Saichiro Atta, who was an expert in producing syphilis infections in laboratory rabbits. On August 31, 1909, Atta ingested some asphenamine into a rabbit with syphilitic ulcers. Encouragingly, Atta found no live bacteria in the animal the next day, and the cancers had completely disappeared after 3 weeks. Atta recorded similarly promising results in further tests with the drug in mice, guinea pigs, and many more rabbits. Thereafter, Ehrlich's laboratory sent some samples of the drug to be tested in patients with primary syphilis at Magdeburg Hospital and elsewhere. On 19 April 1910, Ehrlich and Atta announced to the Congress for Internal Medicine at Wiesbaden that the compound had proven successful in the syphilitic patients. Thereafter, Ehrlich's laboratory was flooded with requests for this drug, so much so that the drug was referred to then as the magical bullet. This demand was met by a German chemicals company based in Frankfurt, Germany, called Ocht AG. And with this, Ehrlich had long-standing commercial and professional contracts. By the last quarter of 1910, the company had supplied 60,000 free samples for further clinical testing in 10,000 patients. At the end of November 1910, Ocht AG released the drug, which was branded Salvarsan, into the market. And by this time, the company was making almost 400,000 ampoules of the drug. The clamor for this drug was so high by 1911 that Salvarsan comprised approximately an eighth of Ost's large pharmaceutical turnover. Salvarsan soon became Ost AG's world best-selling drug, as the revenue for this drug trebled from about £50,000 in the first year to £150,000 in 1911. You know how much that translates to back then. But then, despite its success, Salvarsan treatment was difficult and painful to inject and did not cure syphilis overnight. In addition, the actual synthesis of the drug was complex, and any impurities that managed to get into the final product were highly toxic to the patient. For this reason, Ehrlich took efforts to improve the compound. By 1912, he had developed a new compound, neoasphenamine, which was branded Salvarsan. This drug was easier to manufacture and less toxic than Salvarsan because it contained only 19% of arsenic. Nonetheless, Salvarsan was still liable to cause symptoms like nausea and vomiting. Such problems, however, did not prevent its use. Indeed, despite their unpleasant side effects, both Salvarsan and Salvarsan remained the standard treatment for syphilis until the 1940s, when antibiotics like penicillin appeared. Now you know the history behind the first antimicrobial agent ever developed against the disease called syphilis. And it was after this that the penicillins came about. So you see that drugs do not just come about without some efforts on the part of the scientists, and they actually solve a lot of problems. You know how many people had died from syphilis back then, and even would have died if Paul Ehrlich and his associates hadn't taken that initiative to synthesize those arsenic compounds. Another lesson I learned from this history is that nothing can be written off. That is why Paracelsus, one of the ancestors of modern medicine, says that all drugs are poisons. It is the doses that distinguish the poisons from the remedies. Arsenic, which is known as a toxic compound, was the building block of Salvarsan, which saved a lot of lives. And it was even improved to reduce the concentration of arsenic to bring out a better medication with lesser side effects, which was the new Salvarsan. That is the history of Salvarsan, compound 606, also known as the magic bullet, which was discovered by the scientist Paul Ehrlich and his associates. Now, you know I always talk about antimicrobial resistance and how newer drugs haven't been discovered lately, although scientists are working hard at doing just that. Well, I have good news for you. A new antibiotic has been approved by the FDA, which is the drug regulatory body in the United States of America. The name of the drug is Gepotidacin, with the brand name Blue Gepa. It was just approved on 25th March 2025. It is a first-in-class oral antibiotic for the treatment of uncomplicated urinary tract infections in females greater than 12 years and weighing greater than 40 kg. It is also effective against bacteria like Escherichia coli, Klebsiella pneumonia, Citrobacter frundi complex, and the rest. Another good news is that it is in a different class from other antibiotics. Therefore, resistance is not expected to develop easily. This is a very welcome development, especially since it is gender specific. Personalized medicine is gradually making headway. I know that the question some people, especially my listeners from Nigeria, might have is that when will this drug be available in Nigeria or in my part of the world? Well, I can't tell you for sure when. It depends on a lot of factors, but at least it is a silver lining that it exists, and sooner or later we will all have access to it all over the world, so that our fight against infections can be further strengthened worldwide. So it is congratulations to the scientific community and one more blow to antimicrobial resistance and microorganisms in general. And that is it on today's episode of the Antipharmacist Podcast. I hope that you enjoyed my little story about Salvarsan and this good news about this new antibiotic that has just been approved. I wish you a lovely weekend ahead and a good celebration to my Muslim listeners once again. Do not forget to share, to like, to comment on this episode and even previous episodes. Listen and listen again. Share to people, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Reach out to me via mail at antipharmacistpodcast@gmail.com if you have questions or calls for collaborations, or you could reach out to me via DMs of my social media platforms. Antipharmacist Podcast is the name on Facebook, on Instagram, on TikTok, while on X it is Farm Podcaster, and on LinkedIn I am there as Bemisola Adebisi Jose. Thank you so much for your continued support and for even more support going forward. Till next time, stay healthy and God bless you.